All right, a few more people might pop in, but I'm going to get started. My name is Mariah Kurtz. I work for the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, or FERCOG. Most of you are probably familiar with our work. We do a lot of planning work with the 26 towns in Franklin County that we represent and advocate for and serve. I'm a relatively new employee. I started in January. I'm the livability planner. I previously worked as the town planner in Irving, and I see some familiar faces and some new faces, so this is really great. Irving was not a community preservation community, and so I'm learning some new things along the way, it's helpful to hear this presentation myself too. Yeah, and so the goal of tonight, with the context of FERCOG having had a grant for the last 5 years that we have been working on a lot of kind of access to housing and housing production work. Oh, I need to plug into a power source. One moment. Is that we have been helping our communities with a lot of different things and working alongside a lot of partners. And now we have the opportunity to present this workshop with you all, with the hope being that we can kind of share information across the county. So talk about what the successes and challenges are with being CPA communities that are in a rural area, what things you'd like to do in the future, what we can help you with, what resources we connect you all with to help you. Yeah, so that's kind of the goal for today. There's going to be a couple presentations and then hopefully a lot of time for talking. Megan, are you able to present?
Yes.
Okay. If you don't mind talking a bit, I need to go find a power cord for this laptop, so I will be right back.
Sure. So I can't advance the slides, but I can go ahead and speak about the general what we're doing. We don't need to have the slides. So thank you. Hi, everyone, for coming. I'm Megan Rhodes. I'm the Livability Program Manager at the COG. And as Mariah was saying, clearly we need housing and we need to create more housing, particularly affordable housing. And we know this because we just completed a regional housing plan here in Franklin County. And I'll quickly run through the findings of that plan, just to highlight. I'm sure many of you have probably already heard this, but just to kind of put everything into context. The plan has 3 main goals, which we need in Franklin County, is to preserve our existing housing. We have some of the oldest housing stock in the region that we need to take care of and make sure it stays around as housing. We also need to preserve the existing affordability of housing, and that's certainly where CPA can come in, making sure that those houses that is either naturally occurring as affordable housing or has subsidies whose subsidies may be expiring, that they stay affordable. And then lastly, we need to create new housing. And we do need to create new housing at all income spectrums. We need market rate housing. We need the missing middle housing is what they're calling. And we absolutely need affordable housing. And we have the state, but particularly true for here in the region, we are being faced with a very interesting population demographic scenario that's happening, and that we are losing population, and we've been losing population. And so when you think, oh, we're losing population, great, that mean housing's opening up and that's solving our housing problem. But that's not true, because while we are losing population, we're also increasing the number of households. And so we actually need more housing than ever before. And how could this be? So what traditionally happens 10, 15 years ago, you had a family of 4 or 5 that was living in one house. Fast forward 10, 15 years, and we now have those 4 or 5 people. 2 people are the empty nesters. The adults are still living in that house. 1 or 2 kids have moved out of town. They've gone to California and DC to live, and the other kid has now found their own apartment. And so we've lost population. They've moved out of the region. Instead of what was 1 household, is at least now 2, potentially 3 new households, depending on where all the kids move to. And so basically it's because our household sizes are getting smaller. We've got the empty nesters, we've got the 1 person in the house, we've got young couples. people are getting divorced. There's a whole lot of demographic things that are happening that mean we have smaller households, but more of them. So we need more housing. The population loss, we don't want population loss because it's not good for the region, but it's also not going to solve our housing issues. And we have definitely a shortage of housing. We have actually the housing plan identified. We have a need of over 3,000 affordable units in the region right now, and that's not getting any better. So we have a very acute, severe need for affordable housing in our region. A lot of that, we have a vacancy rate of basically 0 right now. And so that's part of the problem why things are so expensive, is that the supply is so very, very low compared to the demand. So we absolutely need more housing. A healthy housing market has a vacancy rate of about 5 to 8%. We're hovering around 0 to 1%. Lily has a good question. When you say affordable, do I mean market rate affordable or what people can afford? So that is affordable. When I say affordable, it's you're spending ideally no more than 30% of your income on housing. So it's not necessarily subsidized, but it's a certain percentage of your income that's going towards housing. And when we talk about that natural affordability in terms of, are you spending about 30% of your income on housing? The median family's income in 2024 is about 200,000 in Franklin County, your median household income. I'm sorry, no, I'm reading my slide wrong. So what a median family can afford in Franklin County is a house that costs about $200,000. That's about 30% of their income. However, the median home price that's actually available is around 400,000. So 200,000 more than what they can afford. That's a big, big difference. So clearly there's an affordability issue here in Franklin County. And so there's ways to fix this though, right? So there's policy changes we can make. There's zoning, certainly zoning. We've got to at least enable the landscape to allow more housing and more affordable housing to be constructed. And then we can start programs like CPA to start gathering some money to help us, particularly with the lower income housing, because that's not going to occur naturally, and that is our biggest need. And so CPA is a huge and important tool for moving the dial on affordable housing in our region. I'll turn it over to Mariah to talk a little more about some success stories and things that we've seen some success here in Franklin County in creating affordable housing. It's not all doom and gloom and dire facts of what we're out of housing. What are we going to do? There are some success stories.
There are. I think I'm gonna let Stuart start, okay. And then we also have Susan Wergaftic from Greenfield Community Preservation Committee. I think I'm gonna let them present, and then I can talk about some success stories. And I also want to hear from everyone else their success stories from your communities. So Stuart, do you want to go ahead?
Sure thing. And can everyone hear me and see the slides okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. And of course, now the slides aren't advancing. Why aren't they advancing? There we go. All right, so quickly, I'm Stuart Saganor. I'm the Executive Director of the Community Preservation Coalition, and we're a nonprofit based in Boston, but we're really just a combobulation of all these other nonprofits that are involved in CPA. You can see we have open space organizations, historic organizations, and housing organizations that sit on our steering committee and founded our organization. And it seems like we spend a tremendous amount of time on housing. So we're very grateful for the housing partners that we have that share their expertise. The things that we do, a lot of you that I recognize from community preservation committees in Franklin County are familiar with us. We provide tons of technical assistance. And if it's something that's above our pay grade, particularly with some deep housing questions, we have lots of referral places we can send folks for technical assistance. We run a website, which I'm going to show you a little bit, which has a terrific section on housing. Folks who are already on a CPC probably get our email newsletter, but if you're interested in CPA, let me know, and we can get you on that list. We spent a lot of time also advocating for CPA on Beacon Hill, and working with brand new communities that want to adopt it. We did have a community out in Western Mass that adopted this week. Egremont passed CPA. And I know we have someone from, I thought I saw someone from Egremont on the call today. So, and I know Kathy Orlando from Sheffield, who just passed CPA in the fall. So we're making some inroads and some progress. Western Mass has been a slightly smaller concentration of CPA communities. This is the website I was referring to, communitypreservation.org. And I would encourage you all, if you want more information on CPA, this is really the only resource in the state to find it, but particularly the technical assistance tab, which is at the top all the way over to the right. That's where you'll find a great section on housing and different housing success stories and programs that have been run across the state. So CPA has been around since 2000. It was signed by Governor Cellucci in September of 2000, and it's been a huge success since then. We have 201 cities and towns in the state that have CPA. We did this presentation last week, and when I was reviewing it this morning, I was like, wow, I can change that to 201 because Egremont just passed this week. So we broke through the 200 barrier this week. And that's the majority of communities in the state. The interesting thing is, because we have a lot of cities that are involved in CPA, we're almost at 3/4 of the citizens in Massachusetts living in a CPA community with all the cities that have come in the past decade. I love the statistic on the bottom of this slide. I don't know if we'll be able to say forever that no one's ever revoked CPA, but I sure hope we can. It came up a couple times at town meetings this spring, and the citizens there all voted to keep CPA. In Norwell and Sudbury were some of the communities that were considering changing their CPA participation. So it's a pretty resilient program once it is adopted. Here's my favorite map of Massachusetts. I hope yours too. The one that shows all the CPA communities. In green are the towns, and then the orange are the cities that have come into the program. CPA was definitely more of a suburban and rural program in the beginning, with the focus on open space. And in the past decade, like I said, a lot of the cities have come into the program. And housing has taken much more of a forefront with the increase in our housing shortage here in Massachusetts. Any way you look at the program, whether you look at that map I just showed you or this slide, which is the statistics of the program, you can see the success of CPA. Believe it or not, it's added up to over $3 billion in funding in just over 20 years, which is incredible to think about. And that money has funded about 17,000 individual projects. Historic preservation is the largest category of CPA by number of projects, but not by money. Housing is number one by money. But the historic projects tend to be a little smaller. So a majority of, or more than a third of the projects have been in the historic preservation area, close to half. Open space, we're closing in on 40,000 acres of open space that's been protected. A lot of that is wooded conservation land, but also a lot of it, particularly in your part of the state, is farmland. CPA has been a real important cog in paying the local match for agricultural preservation restrictions and lots of farmland protection, particularly in the Connecticut River Valley. Outdoor recreation is always been a part of CPA, but the rules around it changed and became more flexible in 2012. So this is pretty much the category that I think that has had the most investment in the past 13 years or so. There were probably only 500 recreation projects in the first decade and a half of CPA, and now we're up to 4,000. So you can see that there's been a lot of pent-up demand for parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, and things like that. And then the topic for the rest of our conversation today, affordable housing, where over 30,000 units have been protected, created, supported in some way with CPA. So I wanted to give you some perspective on how communities use housing across the state. This is a picture of a smorgasbord of brand new housing developments that have been paid for in different communities across the state on CPA. And it's incredible how creative communities are with CPA. So you're going to see some things here that might surprise you, that you really hadn't thought of CPA being a source for funding in different aspects of housing, but it's pretty broad. Creation of new units is obviously the main goal of the housing category on CPA. And this picture is actually from the back. That's Governor Healy. If any of you recognize her from the rear, she's announcing $158 million of state grants for housing development down in Plymouth a few months ago. And this happened to be at a CPA housing development, which we're really excited that she chose that to announce these state grants that were received by about 15 communities in the state. And when you talk about state grants, it's interesting because most of them require a local match. And communities that don't have CPA sometimes struggle to come up with the money for a local match. So not only do we have money in the CPA fund for communities and matching funds coming from the state, we also get a leg up on all the other state grant programs in the housing, historic, and open space categories because we have the money in our CPA funds for the local match. So it's a nice benefit to have CPA in your community for competing with other funding and leveraging. A very popular use of CPA funds is to adaptively reuse town-owned buildings that are surplus. I know my town has 2 empty historic buildings that we're trying to figure out what to do with, and housing is one of the things that's at the top of the list. This is a former town library in Cohasset that has been converted to housing when the town built a new library and didn't need this building anymore, which was terrific. Anytime you can adaptively reuse, especially historic buildings, that's a win-win for everyone. Another adaptive reuse was here in Easton, where they had an old shovel factory, which was called the Ames Shovel Factory. You can still see Ames shovels at Home Depot. They're made in China now, but they used to be made right here in this factory. It was the world's biggest shovel factory around the turn of the century, 2 turns of the century ago. And now it's well over 150 units of both market rate and affordable housing. And CPA invested about $8 million into this development, both on the historic preservation side and the housing side. One of the lesser known but very popular uses of CPA funds is to partner with nonprofit developers. So community development corporations, but even organizations like Habitat. You know, Habitat is an incredibly efficient builder of affordable housing because they use so much donated labor and donated goods. So they can build housing very efficiently, and a little money from CPA goes a long way. And we have over 50 communities that have partnered with Habitat for Humanity chapters across the state. So it's a terrific way, particularly for smaller communities or communities just getting started that don't have any resources at town hall to help them with housing, don't have housing experts in town. You know, Habitat can be a great first-time partner for something like that. This was a nifty project in Bedford. There was a 40B, was a 10-unit 40B that was going up in Bedford. And because it was a 40B, it was going to have 2 affordable units and 8 market rate. And what the CPC saw this as is an opportunity to buy down some of the additional market rate units to the affordable level. And so they invested CPA money and made a contract with the developer where 2 of the units were bought down from the market rate level to the affordable level. And CPA paid that difference. And now the community came up with 4 affordable units out of this development instead of just 2. No increase in the number of housing units. It's still the same development, but more affordable for residents of the town. So this can be a very powerful tool for folks. If you have 40Bs that are coming in periodically, you can talk to the developer about buying down some more of those market rate units and making them affordable. CPA is also involved in a lot of specialized housing. So on the left is actually a historic building. It's a former printing plant that is in Lexington, and it was used with adaptive reuse to house 9 folks who have traumatic brain injuries who are income eligible. And on that project, by the way, was so successful that Rockport bought a closed inn and repeated the same project with the same nonprofit and also using Rockport CPA funds. On the right, looks like a normal single-family home, but it's actually a group home for veterans that are income eligible. And we've had a number of communities do veterans housing, usually with services involved for the veterans. Hingham, Quincy, Dartmouth, Weymouth, and a bunch more. I believe the house we're looking at is in Quincy. Out your way, we had a really groundbreaking project in Amherst. This is an affordable complex called Rolling Green, sorry. And what Amherst found was that the deed restrictions that were put on this property a long time ago were not permanent restrictions, they were 30-year restrictions. And we have a lot of those in the Commonwealth. Back 30 years ago, these were common to do a 30-year restriction. And what happens at the end of 30 years is the developer can turn the units back into market rate units. And that's what was going to happen here in Amherst. And there were 130 units, I think, that were where people were going to be tossed out because they were all affordable and they were going to be turned into market rate units. So with a big investment from CPA, the town actually intervened, found a different developer to come in and buy the unit, buy the complex. The CPA subsidy made that possible. And then the new developer came in and renewed the restrictions on all these units. So a huge win for CPA. And these 30-year restrictions, every year, we try to build more housing in Massachusetts, and then we lose affordability on some of the housing that we've built in the past because these 30-year restrictions come up for renewal and the units turn into market rate units. So this is a great way to preserve affordability.
Stuart, I'm sorry to interrupt, but did Amherst put another 30-year restriction on it?
Great question. I don't know, Will, if they put a permanent restriction on that or another 30-year. I'm guessing it was a permanent restriction, but I don't know. Beacon Communities was the one who came in and saved the day. It's a really terrific developer, a large-scale developer out of Boston. And they were very interested in working with Amherst and, very honestly told Amherst, look, if we're going to do this, we're going to need a public subsidy from CPA, and Amherst was willing to do that.
And one other quick is the subsidy a recurring amount that's paid to them every year, or was it a one-time so that they lowered the cost of the Beacon?
Exactly. It was a one-time investment to lower the cost for Beacon to buy the complex from the former developer.
Thank you.
So that's what it was. A recurring one would be something like rental assistance, which CPA has also done, and we probably have a slide on rental assistance coming up. One of the nice things about CPA is we do have these other categories, right? Historic and obviously housing is very often built as adaptively reused units in historic buildings. But we also have the open space category, and more communities are realizing that it doesn't have to be an either or, right? It doesn't have to be 30 acres that all go into conservation. It can be 25 acres that go into conservation and 5 acres up along the road that are high and dry are used for affordable housing. So we're seeing a lot more of this cross-category housing development. The land trust in Falmouth actually just purchased a property, and they are the ones that decided they weren't going to protect the entire property, but wanted some of it used for affordable housing. So even land trust, as a matter of fact, the theme of the Massachusetts Land Trust Coalition Conference in 2024 was how housing and open space can cooperate for better outcomes, because they're not making any more land, right? We only have so much in Massachusetts. We're a small state, and we have to be smart about how we use it. And there is certain land that should be protected, and there's certain land that is very good for housing, and would be a great spot to use CPA funds. So these kind of projects that work together, I wouldn't say they are a huge number, but they are an increasing number of projects are realizing as land gets more scarce that we've got to work together here. Another aspect of CPA is to fund affordable housing trusts. Now, there aren't a lot of affordable housing trusts in Franklin County. I think, Megan, you said there were two only. I think two communities that had it.
Leverett and Whately.
Yeah. So so that's something certainly to consider in other communities, is forming a housing trust and then looking to CPA for some of the funding. The Massachusetts Housing Partnership has a circuit rider. Her name is Shelley Gehring, and she is really the leading state expert on affordable housing trusts. And she comes out and does presentations and helps communities write their trust bylaws and do a training and get them going. So if it is something that you think would be beneficial to your community to have a housing trust, please get in touch with MHP and see if they can help you get going. The benefit of having a trust, the CPC is a grant-making organization, but they're not filled with housing experts, and nor do they, actually work on the project. Despite the Stockbridge CPC standing here in front of this new development, you can be sure none of these people on the CPC were actually the ones that hired the developer and did the engineering design and all that. You really need professionals for that. And a housing trust allows you to have a group that is solely focused on housing. And the huge benefit of that is once money is put into a trust, it does not need further appropriation from town meeting to be spent. So a lot of times opportunities come up to buy land or buy buildings or create housing, and the timing isn't right because most small towns have town meeting once a year, and every CPA appropriation has to be approved at town meeting. So something comes up in August, an opportunity, and the owner wants to close on the purchase by the end of the year, but you don't have town meeting till next spring, right? But if you had put money in your housing trust, the housing trust can act immediately and just on a vote of their board, acquire that property or whatever it is that they need to do. They don't have to wait for town meeting, which is a terrific benefit. It's really one of the very, very few ways that towns can spend funding without it being specifically approved by town meeting. So town meeting approves the money going from CPA to the trust, and then it's banked in the trust, and the trust can figure out what to do with it over the remaining time. I hinted that there was a slide on rental assistance, and indeed there is. This has always been a part of CPA, but CPA was clarified in 2012 to specifically say that rental assistance programs and other types of loan programs were eligible for CPA funding because some town councils had questioned that. So this 2012 legislation made it very clear. And this is a big development, increasing development in CPA when COVID came along. We had all of a sudden a lot of communities immediately transitioned CPA money into rental assistance programs because at that time, a lot of folks were out of work, and it was very difficult for them to pay their rent. So, Chelsea, within a month of COVID hitting, had the city council appropriate $1.25 million for a rental assistance program in Chelsea. So hugely helpful and really picked up steam, and a lot of communities got experience with this during COVID, and now we're seeing tremendous activity for rental assistance programs. It has to be done the right way. There's an article on our website that explains how you do housing rental assistance with CPA. You're not handing out checks to individuals who are applying. You are contracting with landlords to put their unit into the program for, let's say, a year or 2 years, and they agree to accept 2 payments for that unit. So they get their market rate, but they get the payment from the person who's income eligible of what they can afford at 30% of their area-wide median income, 30% of their income, and then the rest of it comes from the CPA loan program. So the landlord gets the same market rate rent on the property, but he's committed to keeping that unit in the program for a certain period of time. So it's not the type of program like the state has an emergency rental assistance program where they'll give grants, directly to individuals. With CPA, you're talking a little bit more long-term planning to get the program set up, and you have more certainty that these units are going to be available as affordable units.
Stuart,
Yes.
do you know if what sort of body typically initiates that type of thing? Is it the CPC decides to do it, or is it more similar to how other projects are funded, where somebody approaches the CPC and requests this?
It's the latter, Andrea, because the CPC is, although I could say in Chelsea that they were in the first initial days of COVID, they were definitely the initiator of that. That is the exception rather than the rule, because you have to give the rental assistance funding to an organization to run the program, right? The CPC is not going to look through applications, calculate income eligibility, and that sort of thing. So usually an organization, sometimes it's the housing authority, not too often. Sometimes it's a CDC. On the Martha's Vineyard, it's the Island Housing Trust. It might be a private nonprofit who's going to run the program, but they would apply to the CPC for funding and get a set amount of money, and then they'd work with the landlords to set up the program and process all the applications. So you're really feeding the money to a third party who's going to run the rental assistance program, and that's usually who applies to the CPA committee for funding.
Thanks.
Okay. And Mariah, if I can only see a few people on my screen, so if others have questions, or if you want to wait till the end, either way, just feel free to stop me as I roll through, and then we can do it at the end as well.
Sure.
All right. So one of the things about CPA is, it is a restricted fund, and there are 4 things you can spend it on, which you all know: historic preservation, recreation, housing, and open space. And of all 4, housing is clearly the hardest, right? Housing is expensive. It's politically charged. It's got a long runway, years before you even put a shovel in the ground. There's red tape galore, and it's complicated. You need professionals for that. So in the early part of CPA, I think we saw a lot of the CPCs and maybe even the towns that didn't have infrastructure in housing, shy away from that part of the program. But we can't do that any longer because the state really has a housing crisis. So the pressure is really on for CPA communities to make housing a priority. And thank goodness folks are really responding very well to do that. But it does take effort. It does take local commitment. It takes planning. It takes professionals as well. And one of the most interesting recommendations that we can make for small communities that are just getting started is for their first application to the CPC to hire a housing professional as a consultant, usually in a small town, or maybe even a part-time employee for the town to work on housing. Because the difference between having volunteers work on housing and professionals work on housing is dramatic. It is a very tough nut for volunteers to make progress on, particularly in small towns. So, sometimes we'll get calls from the CPC and they're all well-meaning and they have great ideas, but you can tell from their question, they really have no idea what to do. They have an opportunity in front of them. They have absolutely no idea what to do. And they call for advice on what to do. And our advice is actually not to tell them what to do, because we're not housing professionals at the coalition either. But our advice is make your first CPA investment, not the money into building that housing, because you don't have the capacity to do it. Make your first CPA investment into getting a professional on board who can then take that project on and see it through for the town.
Stuart, do you mind me interrupting quickly for a second? So some of you might be aware of this, some of you not, but I recently sent out a survey to the CPCs in the area, as well as some of the planning boards, I think, and town admins, we're floating the idea of a regional housing coordinator, kind of shared coordinator position at FERCog that CPCs could contribute money towards, and then act as kind of a shared coordinator. And there might be an opportunity for us to also have some other grant funding that would kind of contribute to that as well. And so if I know I heard back from, I think, 6 communities, but if you haven't talked about that yet as a committee and you would like me to talk to you all, or there's someone in your community who you'd like me to talk to about it, please feel free to reach out. We originally did a study or kind of a survey of the towns back in 2018, and there was some interest in having a shared housing coordinator, but it wasn't enough to really come to fruition. And so it seems like there's a bit more interest now. And yeah, and so we're interested in seeing where that goes, because I agree, Stuart, it's really hard for volunteers, especially when we have so many volunteers who are already stretched thin and on a million different boards and committees, to try to make this happen. Lily?
Yeah, so can we use CPC money to fund a salaried position?
If they are focused on affordable housing, yes.
But so what's the mechanism? Because they would have to be a town employee with town benefits and all that stuff, right?
Yes, we actually have an article on our on that technical assistance page I showed folks under the housing category. It says something like, the title is Housing Coordinators Making Waves Across the State or something like that. And it gives the details on this. It's the only category of CPA where you can pay for staff support. The verb support in all the other categories says no. But in the housing category, the verb support on the CPA allowable usage chart says yes. So it's the
So is
only
that,
place you could do that.
does it need to be voted on every town meeting every year?
Yes, just like, frankly, the big dark secret of every municipal employee in Massachusetts is they have a job guaranteed for 1 year, from town meeting to town meeting, or July 1st to July 1st. If town meeting doesn't approve the budget, or cuts the budget, that person doesn't have a job anymore, right? We see it all happen all the time, where towns have to cut teachers or whatever. So every employee of a municipality and state government are all, 1-year appointments until the next year's budget is approved and there's money to pay them for the following year. So same thing with CPA. And we did have one community where they did it for a couple years and they didn't feel like they got much progress out of it, and the CPC didn't want to fund it, the next year. So that is a risk, but the few communities that have done it have had great success. And Mariah, one thing to mention, you probably have heard of this organization, but there is another regional housing shared services organization that does about 7 or 8 communities: Bedford, Carlisle, Sudbury, in that area. It's called the Regional Housing Services Office, RHSO, and the website is rhsohousing.org. rhsohousing.org. I just looked them up.
That's helpful. I know that as I've been doing research on other shared coordinator positions, I think Northeastern, like kind of North Shore Mass, has one, as well as there's, I think, 4 towns in Worcester County that share a housing coordinator. And one of the towns, I don't remember if it was Ware or Palmer or one of those towns, actually was part of the shared program and then decided that they wanted to have their own. So they actually created their own full-time housing coordinator position, or maybe it wasn't full-time, but it was like a 3/4 time housing coordinator position that they ended up creating. So there's various ways that this could look. I know for most of our communities, especially the ones who are on here right now, you probably don't have the workload to support a full-time staff position. And so that's why we're kind of considering a shared position where someone can be available when there are projects or opportunities that come up. But then you're not trying to pay the benefits and salary of someone when there's not a project going on. So I'd love to talk to anyone more about that, or if there's, other questions or comments that people have. We're trying to kind of gauge interest, mostly from the CPC communities, because we know that there's a pocket of money for this, but we've also had some interest from some other towns who are trying to make headway on housing issues and don't have CPA funds to put towards it.
Great. So I have just a few more slides for you tonight, and they're specific examples of smaller towns and what they can do with housing. It's all well and good that I'm showing you pictures from, Chelsea and Somerville, but that's not the reality of what you're facing out in your part of the state. But there have been some terrific efforts, very intentional efforts, not easy, but communities in your area that are small are coming through with terrific housing developments. So this is a development in Pelham. And for Pelham, $500,000 in CPA funds is a lot of money. So this was something that was important to them, and they were willing to put a significant portion of their CPA money for a couple of years into this development. And that's a typical ratio. You see, 500,000 came from CPA and it cost 22 million, in total. I went to a groundbreaking once of a housing development in North Andover, and they handed out the program on one side, and then on the back side was all these lines of tiny, tiny type. And it was all the different funding sources that this project in North Andover used. There were like 30 lines on there of all these state programs, foundations, private fundraising, events, federal programs. It was crazy what they have to do to pull it all together. But the thing about CPA is it's often the first pot of money in. And that can mean a lot to getting more funding down the line. And the other thing that CPA funding comes with is a positive vote at town meeting. If a developer wants to build something in your town, he doesn't need a positive vote of town meeting. The CPA is the only thing that needs a positive vote of town meeting when it comes to housing. Even as we talked about, the housing trusts can go ahead and do things without a town meeting vote. So when you contribute CPA funds as sort of the first seed money into a development, not only are you saying we're willing to put money into this, you're saying we welcome this development in our town because town meeting said yes, they want to spend their money on it. They like this idea. So it goes a long way toward leveraging other funding when CPA steps in at the beginning to contribute to projects like this one in Amherst. Templeton, this is going on right now. They had an old school that they're going to adaptively turn into housing, and they contributed, again, a significant amount of money for their little budget in Templeton, $1.2 million. They hadn't built any multifamily housing in Templeton in 25 years before this development came along. And as you can see, the AMI is quite low, so it's really going to hit an important need in Templeton. We love this project in Sunderland. First of all, it's a terrific looking development. I have not seen it in person, but everyone that goes says it's really outstanding. And it's a senior development. And one of the great things about CPA is you don't have to have the money in the bank to contribute to projects. You can bond against your CPA revenue stream the same way towns bond against their tax revenue stream to build a school or to pave roads or to buy a fire engine. And in this case, Sunderland didn't have the money to contribute right away, so they approved a bond against CPA funds, against future CPA funds to contribute toward this development. And they worked alongside the developer as a friendly 40B, which means that the developer and the town have come to an agreement on everything about the project. And they came up with 33 units of affordable senior housing there.
Could I ask one quick question, Stuart?
Yeah, sure.
When you're bonding against your CPA funds, is that town meeting vote then approving your kind of allotment of your housing funds for the next 10 years? Like, is that kind of what that vote is?
Yes and no. So when you go to town meeting for a bond authorization, you're not actually going to be spending any money. You're just approving the right of the town to go out and get a bond. And so let's say, I think that I can't remember the last slide. I think it was 300,000 that Sunderland needed to contribute. So they asked town meeting to approve a $300,000 bond backed by the CPA program. The town goes out after town meeting and raises the money, the 300, and contributes it to the project. Now, a year later, the first debt service payment comes due, right? So let's say they need to pay $30,000 in year one. The CPC is obligated to take that from their CPA fund and pay it back, but they can take it from anywhere they want. They can take it from their housing reserve account. The housing trust might cover that payment. They can take it from their undesignated fund. They have a lot of options. They can save it from their savings account from previous years.
Okay.
You don't have to take it out of the housing piece, but you are obligating yourself to, you know, a certain amount of money, the debt service, to be paid out of CPA every year.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And we do have a lot of communities, particularly on the Cape and Islands, that already work together regionally, and it can be really effective, which is great to hear that FERCOG is organizing something for you guys to do this out there as well. The Cape has on more than one occasion built affordable housing developments by getting money not only from the one town where the development was going to be, but by getting money from all the other towns in the area on CPA. So this is a 16-unit housing for income eligible adults that have autism. And it's in Orleans, which contributed some of the money to buy the land in the beginning. But then the organization putting this together, I think it was the CDC down there, went to Brewster, Chatham, Eastham, Provincetown, Truro, and Wellfleet, and got CPA funds from all those communities, because obviously everyone who lives in this development is not necessarily going to be from Orleans. They're going to come from all over the region, right? So in areas where people are really tied together, like the Cape and Islands, and in your area, it can really make sense to collaborate regionally. The only problem with this approach is our, you know, decades-old 40B and subsidized housing inventory, which will only give credit on the subsidized housing inventory to the town where the housing is located, unfortunately. But, you know, it's really all about building housing, not necessarily getting, you know, the credit for it on your SHI. So we're hoping that someday 40B changes and they allow credit to go toward different towns that are involved in it. And I think this is our last slide. I wanted to make you aware that on MHP's website, we talked about their technical assistance for creating a housing trust. They have an updated guidebook that was recently done. Municipal Housing Trust came along in 2006. And I think they're in the third version of this guidebook, and it's a terrific download from their website of everything you need to know about municipal affordable housing trusts. And we have over 100 communities in the state that have that. So I would encourage you to go to MHP's website if you're interested in creating a housing trust and get this report, and then contact Shelley Gehring at MHP for more help on forming your trust. And so that's what I have for you. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing, Mariah, and turn it back to you.
Thanks so much. That was really helpful. Does anyone have any questions for Stuart? I know we asked a bunch throughout. All right. If anyone thinks of anything, we can ask Stuart. Or I also I'm gonna have his slides. I'm gonna send out along with I'll send a link to the recording of this, and also I'll include your contact information, Stuart. I imagine most of the folks on this call have it, but just as a reminder. And then next up, we have Susan Wargaftic, who's on the Greenfield Community Preservation Committee, who's going to talk a little bit about what it's like being on a newer CPC and kind of bringing on Greenfield to the process, and kind of what the challenges and rewards of that have been.
Thanks, Mariah. I'm just going to quickly go through some overall stuff because I know some of you are really new to CPC. We started in 2021, and the first year we spent developing our plan, our evaluation instruments, our process, and our outreach efforts. And all of those have evolved over the last few years. And every time it changes, every time we get new results. So we're now finding some really real benefits. And by the way, Stuart has been invaluable to us. If you are not a member of the coalition, join, because there's going to be something where you go, what do I do with this? You know, and he always helps us find an answer. So please do that. Housing is one of our major priorities. It is our priority. And one of the things that we don't have $1.5 million a year. We have $300,000. And you go, well, you can't even build a house for $300,000. So what are you going to do with that to make it work? We have done at least one housing development every year. If you come into Greenfield right now, you'll actually see the hole where one of them is finally getting built. In 2023, which was our first year of actually doing funding, we had one very large proposal from Clinical and Support Options for renovating the shelter on Wells Street, and also putting in 36 units of single room occupancy supportive housing. Supportive housing provides services as well as allowing for the housing itself. People can live there for the rest of their lives. They can live there for a couple of years. That's up to them. But the services help them to be able to make that adjustment from being homeless to being able to do whatever it is they want to do next. And so we're very excited. That's going to be opening in 2026 in the spring. There is, if you go onto Wells Street, right around the corner from Main Street, you'll see that there's a lot of activity right now in a big hole in the ground. And so this is very exciting for us. And we were able to provide $100,000 in matching funds to a $24 million project. And that made the difference for CSO to be able to get the rest of that money. Without that, so we were able to put 1/3 of our funds into that. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Allergy season will drive me crazy. Okay. In fiscal 2024, we had several projects come in. We provided matching funds for a Habitat for Humanity one-bedroom house that was completed just this last week. I went to the dedication. It's really exciting. Lovely young couple. We're looking to happily see them as part of our neighborhood. We did matching funds for a 2-family cooperative home that is being built on Hope Street by Oxbow Design. They came into us with a proposal. It's presently under construction. We're hoping sometime in 2026 that will be completed. They have also been working with a cooperative to be able to develop the cooperative side of that. So it's not only been building it, it's been also developing the mechanism to make it an affordable cooperative home for 2 families. We also provided pre-development matching funds for a 32-unit apartment complex on Main Street, which is now going for funds. Well, we should hear soon. Going for funds for 32 units that will be right downtown. This is being done by Rural Development, Inc., which, by the way, if you need technical assistance or help, they're wonderful. And we expected to get sufficient funding, and by doing that, we hope that they can open in 2027. And this year, every year our outreach got a little bit better, and people knew we were doing things, and so you start to see the growth. We received 6 housing proposals. We funded 4 of them. One was withdrawn because the group was not ready. And one we rejected, but asked them to return with a more fully developed proposal. Of the 4 we funded, 2 are from the Greenfield Housing Authority. One was for pre-development funds for 5 units on Conway Street that they've been trying to build for a while, and is in the very early stages of development. And one was for a security deposit and rental assistance for folks who are either on Section 8 or on MRVP certificates. The reason we did this was because sometimes, because the housing market is so tight, landlords expect you to be able to say yes or no right away. And there are times when people don't have the first month's rent or the security deposit. This gives that money through the housing authority so that they can secure the apartment and make sure that then they can use their certificate. So it's been a very important, we're going before the city council in June, but we expect that to be among the things that are really supported well. We also gave one to Greenfield Housing Associates, Inc., which, like RDI, is connected to the Housing Authority, but it's not a part of the Housing Authority. And this was to provide matching funds to ensure a new roof and other major developments for the Wittenslow building, which is a 55-unit apartment building for very low-income residents. This will also help start a development process for that whole building. They are going for other funding. This is a way to assist them in that process. And then the last one was another matching fund for Pioneer Valley Habitat for Humanity for a 2-bedroom home, which will be starting construction this year, and which I hope to be able to go to another opening in about a year or so. So those are the kinds of things we do. And that is with $300,000. As a matter of fact, last year, because we also funded a bunch of recreation and other things. So it's all about how you piece together with other funding sources. And it's really been and we did not have a specialist helping us, but we have been able to use the folks at the Regional Housing Authority and at the Greenfield Housing Authority when we needed assistance to be able to guide us through areas that we were a little concerned about and weren't sure about what to do. So overall, I'm open for questions. I don't have any pretty slides, but we can get them to you if you'd like.
So I have a question. You clearly move quickly and you are not governed by town meeting. So are you just have rolling applications all the time?
No, we have an application process. It starts in September. We do a pre-application so we can look at what people get us and say, oh, this is it. This is for maintenance. We can't fund it. So that kind of thing. So we get through the, those rules of CPA that are, big picture things that we know we can't fund or we can fund. And then we tell everybody to come back. Applications are due in November. We then start a process, usually with first time in December, and then we go through January into February, and then we set up a budget and go to city council. So we do it once a year. We thought about doing rolling, and we realized it was going to be too chaotic for us, especially since we have such a small amount of money to be able to play with.
Thank you.
Susan, what would you say has been the biggest challenge of getting it set up? What's given you the biggest headache?
In terms of the housing or in terms of everything?
The housing. Well, or both. You tell me.
Okay. Believe it or not, the biggest challenge has been outreach. Making sure, because we wait for applications to come from outside of our committee, and making sure that we get people to understand that this is there, this fund is there, this is what it's used for, and it's community's money, has been, a little bit challenging for us. But every year it's gotten better. We have now banners that, for instance, if you go by some of our sites, you'll see banners that are there to say this was done with CPA money, and when we thank the community, and that's made a difference. But it's getting that word out, and so as I said, we've seen we usually get around 14 or 15 applications every year, and of those we usually fund anywhere from 12 to 14, and often they're small, but we are able to use the matching money. And we spend a lot of time coaching people as well. Folks come in and we talk to them. We say, this is what we need from you. This is what we can do. This is what we can't do. So that by the time they get a full proposal to us, they understand what it is that they need to do. And if they need to go out for more money, they do that. Or we'll tell people to come, as we did with 2 of our applicants, we told them to come back next year because they were not ready or their application would not have met criteria for us when we needed more information. So we've been able to do that. It's been, and that's been a really big deal for us, is getting the word out.
So conversely, what's the thing you think you've done well? What do you give yourself a pat on the back for? Like, you did a good job.
We spend a lot of time on our application and we have tweaked it every year. And we've gotten to the point where this year we would have 3 in our final presentation discussions of each applicant. We would have no more than 3 people coming in at each meeting because any more than that, and it just got too late, and we now can do 4 because the application now really asks the questions that we need answered, and we also have a ratings sheet that we used to make it as objective as possible, so that we have points for various. We have a scale of points for each question, and we then can respond to it. So we think we've done a really good job with that, and other towns have actually asked to see what we've done. So we feel pretty good about that.
Susan, are those forms on the website, or would you be able to share them with me so I can send them out and people can take a look at them?
They are on our website.
Okay.
For the city website for the CPC, so they're available,
All
including.
right, I'll include a link when I send out the email follow-up to this.
Great.
I would just say that I'm also, my other hat is I'm the president of Pioneer Valley Habitat. And even though often when we're building in Franklin County, the amounts of money that we're applying for CPA funds are small, between $10,000 and $20,000, it's a lot for the CPAs and it's a lot for us. And so it makes a really big difference. I know I saw Susan at the dedication for our Greenfield family this past weekend. And truly every little bit of money counts when you're building a home. And especially with Habitat, when we are piecing together, sometimes $5 donations from community members to donations of products. And so I think it can be both exciting and frustrating when you're looking at your pot of money. You're going, well, I'm glad we have this pot of money. It's more money than we would have if we didn't have CPA. But it can also be frustrating when you're looking at how far it actually stretches. It feels like $15,000 doesn't do a lot, but I just want to remind people that it makes a big difference. And I think it was helpful what Stuart said earlier of having those be the first dollars, and the community support goes a really long way when a developer is then writing other grant applications to say, we got funded by the CPA, the community wants this project here, and they're willing to pony up for it.
Just one thing, this past year, because we had to get our funding cycle in sync with when the taxes were available and stuff like that, we actually had only a little over $200,000 this year. And we were able to do these 4 projects and another 8 because people understand that what we're looking for is a way to show community support. We can't, $300,000 that we have in a normal year is not enough to build one house, never mind multiple houses. So it's really important for you all to not get discouraged by, oh, we don't have any money. We really don't have anything to do. If we work it right, we can figure those things out, and we will work with people to do that.
Thanks, Susan. Anybody have any more questions specifically for her?
If anything
Awesome.
comes up afterward, Mariah and Megan both know how to reach me, and I'm happy to provide anything. And really, if you haven't joined the coalition, do it, because it makes a huge, gives you a huge sense of relief when you know you can answer a question that you don't normally have.
Yeah, so now I kind of wanted to open it up to all of you. You all have experience of various lengths of time doing this work. And I'm curious what things have come up for you all as you're moving through these processes and you're moving through the community, of what feels like it really works in your community. What lessons have you learned? I guess I'll start with, are there specific challenges that you're seeing as you're moving through the CPA process that you'd like to talk about or ask for help with? Margaret?
Well, I've learned a lot here because when I first joined the CPC as a senior council on aging member, I was told, well, we haven't been able to do anything with our housing money because the town requires there to be a housing authority and they haven't made one. So we've been able to do nothing with it. So I've learned an awful lot about ways around that, I think. Unless I've gotten this wrong, does my town need to have a housing authority before we can do anything for the senior housing?
No, what town are you in, Margaret? You're in Northfield?
Northfield, yeah.
You can do all kinds of things.
Right. Not only
Literally
that,
was told no.
not only that, but you can work with the Franklin County Regional Housing Authority if you do feel that there's a need for a housing authority to work with.
Yeah.
We recently have started reaching out. I think that we're at the very, very beginning of really finding out that this is very different from what we were thinking. And so I think that we have a lot to talk about at our next CPC meeting.
If I could speak, I would also, I'm on the same committee as Meg. I'm the current chair of the Northfield CPC. And yeah, ever since I've been on it, our challenge is trying to get people to give us, apply to use our affordable housing money. Since we've been, the CPC's existed since 2009, there's only been one application in all that time for affordable housing money. It was for repairs for our affordable senior housing, our one affordable senior housing place in town. We're a small town. We don't have a lot of money. Since 2009, our money building up is, we only have $38,000 in our affordable housing fund. Only $2,800 gets added each year. There is no housing committee, housing trust. So a lot of people come to us sometimes and are like, oh, yes, we want to do this, but they think we're project managers. And we have to be like, nope, that's not what we do. So trying to explain that we want to give you money, but you have to find the project manager. You have to, figure that part out. So that, yeah, I feel like that's one of the things we've had many discussions in our meetings, trying to figure out, like, how can we find the developers? How can we find the people to come to Northfield who want to build? Nobody seems to want to do that in Northfield. We don't have the money to afford somebody's salary, for housing help. So this is definitely where we're really stuck.
Yeah. Well, do you feel like from the presentation you found some new ideas of how you can move forward?
Honestly, I knew already about all the ways that we could use the money. The problem is our lack of a body to, help make that happen. Like I said, we don't have developers coming to us. Nobody seems to want to build in town, or do anything who will tap into it. In terms of the rental and stuff, we would love that to help. But again, that means we would need to get another, like a housing trust or a committee going who would handle that part of it that we could then give the money to. We have a really hard time in town right now filling committees that exist. So, I'm happy to try to explore starting a housing trust or doing that, but I really see a hard time making that happen unless it's just going to be all of the CPC people on it. And we're already on several other committees, as you know. That's how a CPC works. So I'm still feeling very frustrated. about how we can get our money to be used to benefit our town.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a question. I don't know, Stuart, I don't know if you've heard of, one thing we've been batting around is a regional housing trust, a regional one, to go along with like a regional housing officer, is so that all of our towns might be able to contribute to that one regional trust, and then they can act as an independent entity. I have no idea the logistics of how that would work. It would require quite a bit of setup, but that's one way, because our towns are just so small and it was such small pots.
Right. So I don't think it can be I don't think the municipal affordable housing trust legislation allows for that. But before municipal affordable housing trusts came on the scene in 2006, many towns set up housing trusts by special legislation. So,
That's what I was wondering.
yeah, so you could definitely file special legislation, have your state rep file a bill to, create the framework for the trust. And those things usually are not very difficult to get passed at the State House. So a lot of those special legislation trusts still exist because they were, Cambridge has had a housing trust since way before the MAHT legislation in 2006. So that would be if the municipal affordable housing trust legislation doesn't allow for that, that would be the way to get it done.
Megan,
You know,
last year, Paul Mark put in legislation that did not get passed.
Yeah.
But for regional housing trusts, so you might want to talk to Paul.
Thanks.
But I would like to go back to the point that Laura made, and I see it too. In Deerfield, we have a senior housing committee, and we have gotten CPC funds because we've been driving at this. But we need of other affordable housing in town, and trying to get somebody to drive that bus, because the CPC can't do that. You know what I mean? So I just want to share with you, Laura, I totally understand. We've had a senior housing committee. I mean, I started on this 20 years ago, and then we got disbanded, and then we revived 5 years ago. But you'd need trying to find the volunteers and the resources in the small town to drive that. So that's why I'm really interested in talking about hiring a housing professional with a CPC money, because that person could because we invested in a market survey, demographic surveys, the whole thing, to clearly demonstrate we have a need, we have a demand, we have a site, we have all this stuff, but that's this kind of process you got to do. And if you have a housing professional, so I'm really kind of intrigued by that idea of using the CPC funds for that. I had no idea you could use it for staff, and that might be the way forward for small towns. But you'd probably have to tap more than housing money if you're only getting, what did you say, like 38,000 for your housing?
Yeah, it's funny because folks often think because CPA requires 10%, that's all the money that's available for housing, but that's the minimum, right? And we like to see, if communities are only spending 10% on housing, we're not going to get very far. So, at the minimum, it should be technically 25%, right? If all four areas got 25% each, but a lot of folks would argue that housing should really be getting a even larger share than that right now because of how important it is to the Commonwealth. One of the things, Lily, about hiring some help, there are two ways to do it, actually three ways to do it. One would be to hire, a part-time or full-time staff person, who worked at a town hall. But that can be a little bit daunting for communities, right? There aren't many staff in small towns, and you'd have to go through the town for that, and they may balk at creating a new position, even if the funding is there. So the second way is this regional housing services office that FERCOG is talking about creating, and that has proven really successful in other parts of the state. The third way, which is kind of dipping your toe into it, is to not hire an employee, which is always a high bar to hiring an employee, but hire a consultant. there is a organization that's on our steering committee called CHAPA, CHAPA, Citizens Housing and Planning Association. And they have a great consultants directory on their website of housing professionals all over the state. And that's a much simpler process. Your town just puts out a request for proposals and says, we want to hire, we have $10,000 to hire a housing consultant to spend 100 hours in the next year helping us, with our senior housing development in the property that we bought that we don't know what to do with. It's much easier to hire a consultant than it is to hire an employee. So that's another way. So really 3 different ways that you
Yeah,
can get
that's,
at having some professional support.
thank you.
One thing that I do want to note, because I don't know, Stuart, if you've seen this kind of in action, but my understanding is that if you hire a professional, no matter what kind of version of this that you're talking about, they can only work on affordable housing. And I'm wondering if you've seen that in action, where a lot of the time, at least around here, a planner it's not like there's like a 40B application and we know that there's going to be affordable housing as part of a project. Oftentimes we're looking at a site going, oh, we really wish that there was a duplex there. We don't know what that's going to turn into. If you're putting out an RFP for an old school building or something, like, you can include affordability, but have you seen kind of how that's evolved, if other communities have run into the trickiness of that?
Yeah, it's a valid point because CPA can only support efforts toward affordable housing. I haven't seen that particular subject come up, honestly, Mariah. What I've seen come up more is that sometimes they want the housing person that they hire to do other housing tasks, like monitor the affordable units that are in town when they come up for resale, work on social services for people that live in affordable housing. And those are not the things that CPA can fund. So that becomes tricky. I think probably the best way around that is if you can find another funding source in addition to CPA to pay a piece of that person. I mean, no one's going to get to the point where they're tracking the person's hours and said, CPA paid for 6 hours last week and you only spent 5, and one of them, if you have 2 funding sources and you're marrying them and you give that person and let them go to do what they need to do, having that second funding source can solve that problem. So, a small appropriation from the town in addition to a larger appropriation from CPA, and that way, if other things do come up that are market rate housing or working with a 40B or monitoring units, then you know that you're kosher because you had a little bit of extra money put in there from somewhere else.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Or maybe if it's the regional person, FERCog raises that money from somewhere else, and then all the CPA towns that come in use CPA funds, and that way you have 2 funding sources where that person can do both things.
Yeah, and we're looking at that right now. So that's helpful to kind of hear you echo that same kind of thought. So
right.
I'm looking at the time. Are there any kind of questions to wrap up here before we end? I was going to talk about success stories that we've seen in Franklin County, but they've all been covered by everyone else. I was going to talk about Sanderson Place and about a few different habitat projects. So I hope that you all leave this with feeling like the work that you're doing is important and good, and that there are frustrations, but we're all in this together, and that we can do some problem solving. Margaret and Lara, I think I'll be in touch, and maybe we can brainstorm some other ideas and resources for you all so that you can do something with the money that you have.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So the FERCog, we do have some funding now, at least through December, to assist towns with housing issues. And so if we're happy to sit down, do some brainstorming, do some sleuthing, do some research for you guys, whether it's part of creating a regional housing position or whether it's just like, we've got this parcel, like what can and can't we do with this or something, come to us. We're happy to have a conversation and at least point you in different places. If that's all we end up doing, at least we'll get you some information. But we're here to help, and we have the funding over the next year, at least through December, to really be at your assistance.
Yeah. And if you're not sure if it's something we would help with, reach out and ask anyways. And the worst we're going to do is point you in the direction of someone else.
This has been
All right.
helpful. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Have a good night.
Bye, guys.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.